98 degrees in Philadelphia, 96 in Boston, records that had stood on the books for years, broken in a single afternoon. More than 70 million people from the Carolinas to Maine, baking under a dome of heat so intense that cities were opening cooling centers and issuing health emergencies. And the ocean water people were running into at the beach to escape. It was still sitting in the 50s, cold enough to send a body into shock. And here is the part that should get your attention. That was not July. That was not even June. That was the back half of May. And what just happened on the East Coast is not the end of something. It is the opening statement. It is the atmosphere clearing its throat. Because the same force that drove that heat, the same large-scale pattern that flipped the eastern seaboard from a cold, miserable spring straight into record warmth in a matter of days, is the same force that every major forecaster is now telling you is going to define this entire summer. It is late May. The heat that just broke records is being framed by meteorologists as a preview, a trailer, a sign of what is coming. And today I want to walk you through exactly what just happened, why it happened so fast and so early, and why the experts are using it as a warning for the months ahead. Let's get into it. I know what some of you are thinking. It is almost summer. Of course it gets hot. Heat in late May is not exactly breaking news. And you are right to be a little skeptical, because every year somebody puts a red map on the screen and tells you it is hot outside. So let me be precise about why this particular heat is different, because it is not the temperature number alone that matters. It is the context around it, and the context is genuinely unusual. Start with how fast it arrived. For most of this spring, the East dealt with stubborn, lingering chill. A cold, gray, frost-riddled spring that refused to let go, broken only by a brief warm-up in the middle of April before the cold clamped back down. Plants were behind. People were behind. Everybody was waiting for spring to actually show up. And then, instead of spring, the region got summer. Not eased into it. Slammed into it. Temperatures rocketed from that lingering chill straight into the 80s and 90s across the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and Southeast in a matter of days. That kind of violent swing, from a cold spring directly into record heat with almost no transition in between, is itself the signature of an agitated, high-amplitude atmosphere. A calm, well-behaved pattern eases you from one season to the next. This pattern does not ease, it lurches. Then look at the records themselves, because this is where it gets historic. Philadelphia hit 98, Boston hit 96, both setting record highs. And New York City was flirting with something it had not done in nearly 4 decades. If the city had strung together 3 straight days at 90 or above, it would have been its first May heat wave since 1987. Think about that. You would have to go back almost 40 years to find the last time the city saw heat like this early. That is not a routine hot spell. That is the kind of event that rewrites the record book and makes the people who study this for a living sit up straight. And here is the mechanism behind it, the thing I really want you to understand, because once you see it, you will recognize it all summer. The engine of an event like this is what meteorologists call a heat dome. Up high in the atmosphere, a massive ridge of high pressure builds and parks itself over a region. Think of it as a lid clamping down on the air below. That dome of high pressure does several things at once. It forces air to sink, and sinking air compresses and warms. It suppresses clouds and rain, so the sun beats down unfiltered day after day. And because it is a blocking pattern, it does not move along the way normal weather systems do. It sits, it anchors, and every day it sits, the ground heats up more, the air heats up more, and the temperatures climb higher and break records they had no business challenging. The heat dome is the dominant feature of summer weather across North America, and the one that just set up over the East is, by every indication, an early flexing of the pattern that is going to keep building as the season goes on. Now let me explain why the timing of this, the lateness in the calendar, and the earliness in the season makes it more dangerous than the same temperature would be in August. Because this is the part that genuinely matters for human safety, not just for the record book. In late August, 95 degrees is survivable for most people because their bodies have spent an entire summer acclimating to heat. The human body physically adapts to sustained heat over weeks. Your sweat response becomes more efficient, your cardiovascular system adjusts, your tolerance climbs. By late summer you are, in a real physiological sense, heat conditioned. But an extreme heat event that arrives in late May hits bodies that are completely unacclimated. People went from needing a jacket to facing 98 degrees in the span of a few days. There was no conditioning period, no ramp-up. The body's defenses were not ready. That is exactly why early season heat waves are historically some of the deadliest, and why heat is consistently one of the leading weather-related killers in this country, ahead of the dramatic stuff that gets all the coverage. Heat does not produce dramatic radar signatures, it does not toss cars or tear roofs off. It arrives quietly, it builds slowly, and it takes the vulnerable, the elderly, the isolated, the people whose air conditioning is not working or who do not have it at all, while everyone else is just complaining about how hot it is. And there is a second hidden danger that this specific event put on full display: the water. Forecasters had to warn beachgoers directly because the first hot weekend of the year sends enormous numbers of people sprinting into the ocean to cool off. But while the air had rocketed into the 90s, the coastal water along the northeast was still sitting in the 50s. Water that cold can cause cold water shock, a sudden involuntary gasp, reflex, and cardiovascular stress that can incapacitate even a strong swimmer in seconds. Add a moderate rip current risk along much of the mid-Atlantic and the Jersey Shore, and you have the recipe for exactly the kind of tragedy that happens every single year on the first hot weekend, when summer air meets winter water and people forget that the calendar lies about how warm the ocean is. So let me get specific about who is in the path of this pattern and what to watch, because the East Coast is not one uniform place, and the heat lands differently depending on where you are. The Big I-95 corridor cities: Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. This is where heat is most dangerous, and the reason is the urban heat island. All that concrete, asphalt, and brick absorbs heat through the day and radiates it back at night, which means the overnight low never drops far enough to give the body a break. The real killer in an urban heat wave is not the afternoon high. It is the warm night that follows it, the night that never cools down, denying people the recovery period their bodies need. When you hear a record warm low temperature, that is often more meaningful for human health than the record high. Watch the overnight numbers in the cities, not just the daytime peaks. The Mid-Atlantic and Southeast, from the Carolinas up through Virginia and into the D.C. region. This zone sits where the heat and the humidity combine most brutally, and humidity is what turns a hot day into a dangerous one. The temperature on the thermometer is only half the story. The heat index, what it actually feels like to your body when you factor in the moisture in the air, is what determines whether you can safely be outside. When the air is thick with Gulf and Atlantic moisture, a temperature in the mid-90s can feel well past 100, and your body's primary cooling system, sweating, starts to fail because the sweat cannot evaporate. Watch the heat index, not the air temperature, across this region. New England and the interior Northeast, the places that are least prepared for extreme heat because they need it least often. A huge share of homes in the cooler parts of New England do not have central air conditioning, because for most of the year they do not need it. That makes an early, intense heat wave especially hazardous there, because the infrastructure and the habits simply are not built around staying cool. When record heat hits a region that rarely sees it, the human toll can be disproportionately high relative to the actual temperature, precisely because nobody is ready. Now, I want to be honest with you about what comes next, because this is where the genuinely important part lives. The heat that just broke records did not last forever. Relief arrived, and it arrived the way it almost always does in an agitated pattern like this, not gently, but violently, in the form of severe thunderstorms tearing down the I-95 corridor and a cooler, wetter, unsettled stretch behind it. That is the rhythm of this kind of atmosphere. It does not transition, it collides. Extreme heat builds under the dome, and then the dome breaks down in a clash of air masses that fires off severe weather, and then the cycle resets and builds toward the next round. That is not a one-time event. That is a pattern, and the forecasters are explicit about what is driving it and where it is headed. Because every major outlet covering this heat wave attached the same caveat to it. This is a sign of what is to come later in the summer as El Niño gets underway. That is the thread that ties this whole season together. A developing El Niño, a warm pool building in the Pacific, reorganizing the large-scale flow of the atmosphere over North America and tilting the odds toward a hotter-than-average summer across nearly the entire country. The record heat that just slammed the East is being read by the people who forecast this for a living, not as an isolated hot spell, but as the first visible flex of the engine that is going to drive the months ahead. The heat dome that built over the East is the kind of feature that, in an El Niño summer with a hot national outlook, is likely to keep rebuilding again and again, through June, July, and August. What just happened is the preview. The feature film is the summer itself. So here is your practical action list. Because knowing it is going to be hot is useless without knowing what to do about it. Acclimate now, deliberately and gradually. If the first heat of the season caught your body off guard, do not make that mistake with the next round. Spend short, controlled periods outside in the heat to let your body start adapting before the next dome builds. Do not go from air-conditioned comfort straight into hours of yard work or exercise in extreme heat. That sudden full exposure on an unconditioned body is how heat illness starts. Identify your cooling plan before you need it. Know where your nearest cooling center is. In a heat emergency, many cities open them, and you can often find the nearest one by calling 311. If your home does not have reliable air conditioning, know in advance where you will go, a library, a mall, a relative's house, when the next heat wave hits. Figure it out on a cool day, not in the middle of a dangerous one. Watch the overnight low in the heat index, not just the daytime high. The high temperature is the number everyone quotes, but the warm overnight low is what wears the body down, and the heat index is what tells you whether it is actually safe to be outside. Those two numbers are your real risk gauges. Respect the water. If you are heading to the northeast coast on the first hot weekend, understand that the ocean is still dangerously cold even when the air is not. Cold water shock is real and fast. Ease in, never dive into cold water to cool off, and take rip current warnings seriously. Every year, the first hot weekend produces water tragedies that were entirely preventable. And check on people. This is the one that costs you nothing and matters most. Heat kills the elderly, the isolated, and the chronically ill far more than it kills anyone else, and it kills them quietly, in homes where the air conditioning failed or was never there, where nobody thought to look in. Check on your older neighbors. Check on relatives who live alone. Make sure their cooling works and that they are drinking water. A knock on a door during a heat wave can be the difference between life and death, and it asks almost nothing of you. Here is the honest summary of where we stand. It is late May, and the East Coast just lived through a record-breaking heat wave that rewrote the books from the Carolinas to Maine, slammed unacclimated bodies with temperatures decades early, and put more than 70 million people under dangerous conditions, all before summer has even officially begun. The heat broke the way it always breaks in this kind of pattern, through severe storms and an unsettled, whiplash stretch behind it, and the forecasters are unanimous that this was not a one-off. It was the early flex of an El Niño amplified summer that is tilted hot across nearly the entire country. The heat dome that built over the east is exactly the kind of feature that rebuilds, again and again, through the heart of summer. What you just felt is the smallest version of what is coming. So acclimate now, build your cooling plan before the next dome sets up, watch the overnight lows in the heat index, respect the cold water under the hot air, and check on the people around you who cannot fight the heat on their own. The record book just got rewritten in late May. The atmosphere is telling you, in the clearest language it has, what kind of summer it intends to run. I will be tracking every build and break of this pattern all season long, and I will bring you the next update the moment it sharpens. Until then, stay cool, stay prepared, and never